relationship with God. Foundation of substance is the tricky one. What's that one? You try and
Practice.
embrace your neighbour, your brother, that difficult uncle, etc., etc. So I thought I've got to set up some kind of conditions before I speak, so at least there's a chance, you know, that God may invade. And the foundation of faith bit wasn't too bad because I do that anyway, a lot of study, and right up to midnight there was a Zoom call from the American, sort of, what was our seminary anyway, and they were talking about the faith side of things. And then the foundation of substance, I thought, what can I do for that? Well, I hadn't spoken to my older sister for a long time, and I better make that call, because as you know, God says, don't come to me until you've resolved things with your brother or sister. I thought this might be a bit tricky, but I did it anyway, and it worked. It worked. She did all the talking. I didn't have to say anything, and she was happy to have the phone call. And I thought we can look at these conditions in a little bit of a heavy way, thinking, you know, like the classic one in the Bible, sort of where Jacob and Esau, where you do this incredible condition, but actually for ourselves, I think just make a small token effort. It can have a very, very big effect. Give God something to work with, and we don't have to be too dramatic. You know, small things make a big difference. Anyway, the theme, the title was cigarettes, seatbelts, and all things beautiful. Because what I was thinking of was, when you're called by God, or when you want to become or take up a life of faith, it's a life of engagement with others, really. And it's a command, in a sense, to sort of take up the challenge of trying to make society a little bit better. And I was thinking about some of the campaigns that have been historically, you know, when I was growing up. One was the seatbelt. It was voluntary, and then there was a campaign to try and encourage people to actually use them. There was TV campaigns. There was counter arguments. You know, you can just hold the steering wheel very tightly, and that'll do it. It doesn't work, actually. There was the argument that you were thrown out of the car in an accident instead of being stuck in the car. And then there's all these kind of issues of this isn't a very controversial thing, it just seems common sense, but it took a long time. Eventually it was passed into law, so you have to wear them anyway. And I was thinking, you know, this is like, and cigarettes, of course, is another issue. It's, when I was growing up, as a child, I could buy a little packet of sweets in the shape of a cigarette box, and you had these long sticks of sugar, so you could imitate Mum and Dad or your stars on TV. And I was thinking, you know, that's about as terrible as it gets, really. But people didn't understand, or I think some people did. There were obviously voices of protest, but it took a long time for those to get through, and for people to realise these things really need to be controlled, or even ideally not used. And we're still at it today. I mean, almost on key, the local paper, you know, came up with this, and it's the government trying to sort of reduce consumption by putting a heavy tax on them. So it's now going to cost you about £16 for a pack.
Yeah.
Any smokers in there?
Yeah, it came last week.
I tried them as a child, but I didn't like them. And my mother was the kind of person who would just give me a whole box and say, go and smoke the lot, see what it does to you. You know, they were pretty tough training, you know. But anyway, I survived childhood, really glad to know. But the point being is, you know, these campaigns, which seem logical, they're for the benefit of people, they're trying to inspire us to make a better, improve our own health and to make a better, safer society. They were resisted and they were difficult, and they're still in some sense going on today. So when we want to come along with something a bit more tricky, like to try and change the internal nature of culture and the spiritual side, which can be very, very controversial, it's kind of no surprise that we get a lot of kickback. And my point being is, don't be disillusioned by, the path we're on. It can be very, very challenging, and it can wear you down. You can think, in some days you could say, well, what's the point? Who's going to listen? Who's going to respond? If you go out in the street, we know from experience it's tough going, isn't it? But if it's hard with something as practical and as sensible as seatbelts and cigarettes, we can also take comfort from that in the sense that our challenges, are going to be much harder. They've got logic and science on their side. We don't necessarily, we have to sort of convince people of the presence of something that they don't naturally feel, or we have to battle against the other things that are coming from culture itself, which is, in a sense, trying to, say, well, you're wrong, or this doesn't really matter, it doesn't really mean anything. So the point of the title is, I could have written, don't be disillusioned by the path that we're on. That could have been another way of expressing it, but I chose that title as a bit more catchy. Anyway, I spent a few months studying the sort of internal side of what we believe, the theological side, and I want to just finish on this area because it was quite an interesting experience. So if we take, for example, this is the theology of it, of what we believe. I'm not going to go into great detail because I couldn't, because haven't got that good a memory or that good a brain anyway. But say, for example, if you take the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The problem is that Jesus didn't say that. He was speaking in Aramaic. And in Aramaic, it's a bit more broad. In other words, he's not talking specifically about our Father. He's talking more about God the parent, or it actually has a broader, open meaning. That God is not just, in a sense, our Father. God is more than that. So we've tried to take this forward and say, our Heavenly Parent. It's just one small detail. But the point is, this idea got lost, and the idea of a mother God, which in a sense Tom brilliantly has just testified to, became a bit hidden. And we can't blame anyone for this. We can't point the finger because these things happen. And the male-dominated culture, sort of took over, and the feminine aspect got really lost in a sense. It's there in the background, it's there if you look for it, but it's not predominant. And the male aspect, Father God, became sort of the main player, as it were. And I was just reflecting on that, and that in a sense we're trying to recover this balance, this sense of a parental God, and it's not as easy as you might think to do, because a long history of thinking in a certain way isn't going to be changed very readily. But we're trying to bring that aspect in because it's really important to have balance in the religious world. Just as it's really important to have balance in the economic world, and also in the way we treat our planet, because it needs this feminine, caring side. So I was just very struck But the theology is very, very influential. You hardly ever read it, you hardly ever study it. It's there in the background, but it's like the sort of software that you don't really notice on your computer. It's there underneath, operating the system. And it needs to be reformed, in my view. It needs that voice, that feminine voice, very, very, it's necessary if we're going to create the kind of kingdom that we really want to see. So that's what struck me, and I thought I would share that, really. Let me think. I've got one more thing to say. I did have a clip, a video clip, didn't I? Can we show the first one?
In the shadow.
Yeah. So this is just, I like this little clip because this is an astronaut. He came back and he shares his experience from seeing the planet from, if you like, from such a distance.
I felt that I was literally standing on a plateau somewhere out there in space, a plateau that science and technology had allowed me to get to. But now what I was seeing, and even more important, what I was feeling at that moment in time, science and technology had no answers for. Literally no answers, because there I was, and there you are, the Earth, dynamic, overwhelming, and I felt that the world was just, there's too much purpose, too much logic. It was just too beautiful to have happened by accident. There has to be somebody bigger than you and bigger than me. And I mean this in a spiritual sense, not a religious sense. There has to be a creator of the universe who stands above the religions that we ourselves create to go in our lives.
A friend of ours got us to go to a Bible study at the tennis club. And after that weekend, I said to Jesus, I said, I give you my life, and if you're real, come into my life. And I believe, and he did. And I had this sense of peace that was hard to describe. It was so dramatic that we started sharing our story. And I say my walk on the moon lasted 3 days, and it was a great adventure, but my walk with God lasts forever.
I think that is a very powerful testimony, because those guys, they're not just your regular guy on the street, and they're sort of testifying to the existence of a creator, which sometimes we need to sort of reassure ourselves we're not just, there is something very, very powerful with us, who's supporting us, who exists, really does exist. What we're trying to do is represent an aspect of that and to share it with others. And this is, coming to Sunday service is not the most popular of activities in the modern world, but I think it's what we're doing here, this little group of people here, it's really valuable. It's a very valuable condition, as I mentioned right from the beginning, that allows God to still operate in our culture and society. And then, are we okay to do the last and final piece?
It didn't load when you said.
Okay. So it doesn't matter. The one with. Alright, I was just going to finish with. I'll just explain it rather than put it on the screen. There's a gentleman called Paul Simon who's a singer, songwriter, and he showed in a small clip his experience of being an artist, of creating something. So first he had a dream, and the dream was quite powerful, so he wrote it down. And then he sort of transmits that dream into his music. And through that, he creates something very, very beautiful, as our musician doesn't somehow understand this process. So this is how something beautiful is created. And it's quite a nice little clip. It's out there on YouTube, so maybe some of you can look it up. I always find that the creative process, I'm not personally very creative, but I really admire people who are. And, you know, he's searching for something beautiful just beyond the horizon. And sometimes I feel we're in a similar spot because, you know we're not perfect. We're battling away with our struggles and processes, but we're aiming for that just on the horizon, and we're trying to get there. And it takes some dedication and work. You know, you don't just roll out of bed. You've got to put some effort into it. And there is something very beautiful just there that we can catch. So I thought I'd end with that. That's the beautiful bit. So thank you. I hope you got something from it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.